Hey everybody, Tony D with a screenwriting tip on how to commit a crime. Now, I'm not telling you to commit crimes in real life. I'm talking about how you outline crimes in your stories, your screenplays, your novels, or whatever. A lot of people don't think them through, and they can apply to a lot of different things. So let's just get into it briefly. Um, the best way to plan a crime for your main character is to start with the court case backwards, because there are certain goals that criminals have, and the main one being not to be caught and never to be prosecuted. So some crimes are too big to simply just say, I'll never be caught, right? So for instance, if you've got characters who are targeting someone in a murder, it's really tough never to be caught for a murder, because murders don't expire with police. They after a while they go to a cold case, and then every so many years a detective might say, "Oh, let me go through the cold cases," and he starts reinvestigating the case. There are cases where 20 years later, people get arrested and go to prison. The case of there was a comic book convention organizer out of Pittsburgh, whose con I did every year, and they went back and looked at his wife at the time had been murdered in his comic book store, and they went back 20 years later, and he's in jail. So take what you can of that. It's an interesting story if you want to Google. It's a bit nuts. It was profiled on one of those crime shows. But anyhow, you want to start with the court case, because your character would have to assume that they would be questioned or arrested or even tried for the crime because they actually did it. So they need to sort of plan the contingency from that point backwards. So if you're in the court and your final sort of bulwark against going to prison for the rest of your life has to be like, you need plausible deniability, you need an alibi, you need to make sure that there's enough evidence that other people could have been convicted of the crime. It can't be the sort of thing where, well, you were there and the victim was there, and there's no chance in hell that anybody else was there at that particular time. That's a real problem, right? You can't get around that. But if someone is killed and other people had motive being a big factor, other people had opportunity, and there's just too much evidence, well, then that noise can shield your character from prison, and that's kind of what your character wants. And that way, if depending on the story. Now, sometimes you want the character to get away with it. That might be part of the story. He gets away with one murder, and then he's about to commit another, and then the story is about that. Or it may be that he does trip up, but since you played him at the height of the intelligence, you can pinpoint that one little detail that he forgot or messed up in the best way possible. So, it could be something as simple. In the case I just mentioned, it was a phone call that tripped up the murderer, apparently. If you go back and look at the case, apparently what had happened was he had always stated he wasn't in the store at the time, but someone called the store and he answered. And they had that witness. And that's what tripped him up, and they reopened the case and whatever. It could be something that you say to the cops, right? It could be a detail that you blurt out that you shouldn't know. So if your character has no knowledge of the murder or crime or whatever, and the police question you, and then you trip up and offer up a detail that the police didn't offer up, well, that's a real problem. See, an innocent person can't do that, right? An innocent person, unless they're guessing, they're not going to say, oh, yeah, the porch where you found the body, it's really dark over there. Like, well, how did you know that? You've never been there. Like, that's a real problem. That's what cops try to do in their interrogation. They try to trip you up into confessing things. And one of the ways they do that is they lie to you. They'll lie. They'll say somebody in the other room is already, pegging you. They'll say anything to get you confessed. And there's all sorts of techniques. Your character would either have to be aware of those techniques and be able to deflect them all, or he'd have to just immediately clam up and call his lawyer and just say nothing, which by the way is probably the smartest thing for anyone to do. I mean, I'm a libertarian, so because even innocent people get caught up in it. The cops are only human. Some of them, they're just lazy. They shouldn't, but they make up their mind about a crime 10 seconds after they get on the crime scene. Oh yeah, it must have been the owner, and we're just gonna shake him down until he says something, and then boom, he's under arrest. That happens. It's happened in the past, and it can happen, and that could be part of your screenplay too. It's like, guy is falsely accused of murder, and here's why. And then you'd want to go through the logical steps of why someone might trip up and say something that the cops would then, you confirmed my suspicion. I knew you were guilty. That kind of thing, right? But most criminals are, crimes are mostly crimes of opportunity, right? So they don't have all that planning stages going on. And in that case, then you can understand, like, a character in a fit of rage pushes somebody off a cliff. That's different. They didn't set that up. They got mad and killed somebody, and then later they tried to cover it up, right? But someone who plans a crime, and a lot of times you're writing stories about that, especially if you're writing mysteries or crime, they're going to be a lot more smarter about it. They're going to sit there and sort of look at everything. A big factor is surveillance, right? If you're doing a heist movie, it's always going to be cameras and alarms and security guards and all these things, and how you neutralize them all, so you can commit the crime. That's a huge factor. It's a huge factor in them getting caught or not getting caught. Again, alibis are key. If you have witnesses seeing you 100 miles away at a certain place, and that's ironclad. Maybe you weren't there. You arrange it somehow that make it look like you were there. That could be a big factor in proving your innocence, right? So I don't know. There's all kinds of ways around it. I mean, you could do like a Ferris Bueller thing, right? And that's how Ferris Bueller can apply to, or how this sort of gamesmanship can apply to something like Ferris Bueller, which isn't about crime, right? He's just sneaking around on his parents. So when Ferris sets up the mannequin, so when you open the door, like it rolls over and moves and plays recordings of his voice, like that's a funny scene, but it's also very, clever. It's thought out. Like he knew the reaction of his parents. Criminals can use the same logic, and you can use the same logic in your screenplay for something else, like character wants to have a surprise birthday party and wants to really surprise them. You have to be smart about it. You kind of know, if your spouse asks you, "Are you planning something for me?" If you just go, "No," that's really suspicious. But a smart character would just be like, "What? Planning what?" Like, "Oh, right, your birthday." No, I'm not planning anything like that. That's the way people talk. So you have to be kind of ready with those reactions, or characters have to be ready with those reactions in order to be able to get away with their crimes, or to have a chance of it. It all depends upon your story. Sometimes you want characters to get away with it. Sometimes you want them to get caught. But if you want a smart character to get caught, it has to be a very tiny mistake, right? It can't be like something as obvious as robbing the place and touching everything with your bare hands. It's got to be something small, like, they wore gloves, they burned the getaway car, and they burned all the costuming and all these elaborate things. Joan, I'm almost done. So they have to go to a huge length to get away with crime, because you have to get away with. You have to do more than the cops are willing to do, right? If the cops, if you destroy the evidence and then take the ashes and then drive up to Nova Scotia and bury them on an abandoned hill, I mean, how are the cops going to do that? Well, maybe if you killed a bunch of people, they might, just to get those ashes to analyze them. but it's unlikely they would for, say, a heist movie. So the crime itself, I think, is a factor. Yes, Little Joan, you're a little criminal. That's what you are, little doggy. You're a little tiny criminal, and she does the same things to me that your character should do. She's very smart, very smart. Waiting until I'm in the middle of a video. Anyhow, always play your characters at the height of their intelligence. So if you do have characters who are going to commit a crime, you should really do some research and think about it before you write it, and make sure you sort of have in mind how they would get away with it if you intend for them not to get away with it, and how they would, how they're going to get away with it if they are, in fact, going to get away with it. So, people don't watch it and go, well, that was kind of lame. And speaking of lame, I got to go take care of a little dog. See you next time.